Hello, and welcome to the Haaretz podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. Tense times in Israel as all eyes are on the standoff between U.S. President Donald Trump and Iran's leadership and their stalled negotiations to turn a temporary ceasefire into a longer-term agreement or a full-on resumption of the U.S.-Iran-Israel conflict. The unpopularity of this war in the United States and the narrative that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushed the U.S. president into the conflict has added to growing disgruntlement with the Jewish state in Trump's own Republican Party and his MAGA base. Joining me on the podcast today is our Haaretz cyber and disinformation correspondent, Omer Ben Jacob. Omer has uncovered the extensive efforts in the Israeli government being used to counter that drop in support, which precedes the Iran war. He tells us about the multi-million-dollar campaign designed by a former Trump advisor involving a network of pro-Israel websites and techniques to drive Republicans to them. Their messaging includes support for the war in Iran and other political messages, despite the fact that the Israeli government-funded campaign was supposed to be an effort to combat antisemitism. Also in our conversation, Omer discusses the state of the Israeli spyware industry and the intensifying cyber wars accompanying the dual election campaigns coming up this fall, the midterms in the United States, and the elections in Israel. Our conversation is coming up. Omer Ben Jacob, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, what's up?
Omer, your story in Haaretz is about the extent to which it seems the Netanyahu government is worried about losing support in the U.S. Christian evangelist community and the millions that it seems to be spending in a very sophisticated, high-tech effort to get them back. You were on this podcast back in November reporting on the fact that firms were being hired for this purpose, particularly one run by a former Trump associate. But now we are seeing the fruits of their labor. What exactly are they doing?
Okay, so we're now getting kind of a real-world, real-time example of how Hasbara or public diplomacy looks both post-Gaza and post-Trump, but also post-AI. And I think what's so interesting is that in November, we had reported initially based on what's called FARA documents. So documents of foreign, like anyone who works for a foreign government or a foreign entity has to register as an agent. So we saw Israel hiring for the first time, not just American PR firms, but specifically ones linked to the American right. And this was indicative that they were kind of giving up the classic Hasbara struggle of winning young hearts and minds and kind of flipping young liberal Democrats. And they're now pivoting to kind of, at least consolidate and not lose control over the evangelical, if not to say actual MAGA right. As a plan, right? It's just like we're going to tap Parscale and we're gonna hire firms that are linked to evangelicals and we're going to focus on churches.
Brad Parscale was formerly Trump's online guy, right?
Yeah. He was his social media kind of like campaign dude, and he was ousted at some point or left at some point, whatever, as happens in Trump world. But the point is that like he's kind of emblematic of this wider shift that Israel is doing because they're now actually getting people from that world, right? So it's no longer just big American firms that can help you kind of touch the American mainstream, but now we're seeing this kind of very explicit focus on evangelicals, and again, very explicitly the MAGA right. And this was something that was just kind of structurally or implicitly kind of present in the first stage. But now we're seeing the campaign. So how do these campaigns actually look? It's interesting because it also shows how public diplomacy and Hasbara, and actually, to be honest, all forms of advertising work in the age of AI, where it's no longer what we call SEO. It's no longer just people trying to put up links that will top your Google results or put up even links that will penetrate your social media feed. So when you open the feed, you see a story that is pro-Israel as opposed to pro-Palestine, right? It's something different. It's a very interesting array of websites that are not really pretending to be a news outlet as much as they're trying to be almost like a think tank, or almost say like an organized body of knowledge with a very specific domain expertise. Because when the ChatGPTs and Claudes and Geminis of the world read, quote unquote, or scan, quote unquote, the internet, they're not just looking for specific words, right? The way like Google kind of works, but they're actually trying to find complete answers to whole questions. So what we're seeing here is Israel's attempt through Trump's former kind of digital wizard to kind of penetrate the GPTs and make the kind of wider knowledge ecosystem online more pro-Israel. Efficacy aside, because we don't know. That's also the thing. Like a lot of things with PR, you don't know. A lot of it is actually quite bullshitty, right? So we don't actually know. At a big scale, we get kind of a really interesting example of how you break down the pro-Israel narrative today into different kind of factual arguments. And one of the most interesting themes I saw there is, I would say, actually an obsession with media, an obsession with narrative wars, and an obsession with disinformation. Because though these, I found like 7 or 8 websites overall, though each one has like a specific focus, like economy, law, defense, whatever. Culture, yeah, like a lot of innovation.
And they all have these fancy Latinate names, Alivia and Cognito.
And innovation AI.
So AI must tell us that the more 100%. serious the title is, the more people will take it seriously.
100%. It's like the infamous political campaigner firm Cambridge Analytica was literally called that because they wanted something academic. So they just went for Cambridge, and then it was like it wasn't enough, so they just added Analytica, in this kind of Latin way. And we're seeing something very similar here in terms of the branding itself, but also in terms of the structure. So the articles or the pages themselves are actually structured the way you would think of like a think tank. So it's like core things that we're interested in. So for example, the one that's focused on culture or economy has like, cultural values or economic values, or, Israel and American defense or Israel American kind of tech ties, right? There's like these 1, 2, 3 core kind of, I would say, we believe or our principles or main gist of who we are.
One is an institute against extremism. For example, Hamas extremism.
Exactly, yeah. So but again, it's also not that they're not pretending to be like a physical place with researchers. It's just, that's the vibe, that's what it's giving off. Like it looks like something that it's actually like a think tank and people who do research. And the most interesting aspect is that each of one of these websites has a disclosure. Yeah, it says this website was put together as part of was on behalf of the state of Israel or something like that. But that's what's kind of, though that's fine and that's good and that's really important, what we're forgetting, or what is actually interesting, is that the idea is for this stuff to kind of permeate as actual knowledge into the GPTs. And to get that to work, you have to look at how the websites are structured and how their articles are structured, because they're actually structured like Wikipedia articles. So each kind of blog post about specific things, for example, how support for Palestinians, for example, is the result of a massive influence campaign funded by Qatar. It's not because of organic support. It's a completely fake, disinformation run kind of thing. So how is this proven? Through something that has that headline. And then you actually have something that looks exactly like a Wikipedia article. There's like a table of contents that kind of structures it out in a very clear way. And there's sections with that kind of, the core facts. And then there's a conclusion section. It's very structured in a very kind of specific, I would say, like almost knowledge-focused, not knowledge-facing way. And it's very interesting because you see, more than anything, this kind of again, repetitive obsession with narrative wars, media, and perception. There's almost this kind of like, I would say almost like essentialist position. There's like, nothing is real. Everything is just debate about facts. If anyone says Israel is wrong, it's because of manipulation or rage baiting, or, there's like articles saying, Western governments are failing and people are like realize they get, like brownie points for being against Israel. So it's just like, it helps people cover for political failure.
So it's very meta, because here is a state campaign meant to change hearts and minds through information, disinformation. That's pointing out how the narrative about Israel 100%. Is a result of misinformation 100%. And disinformation.
100%. I think the second or more politically kind of problematic thing is not the fact that Israel is doing this campaign. Countries are allowed to advance their interests in different ways. I think what's so problematic about it here is that this is was pitched as we're fighting anti-Semitism.
In the FARA documents.
Yeah.
In the documents filed to the U.S. government on behalf of Israel doing this campaign, it was said that it's a campaign against anti-Semitism.
Yeah, to combat anti-Semitism in the U.S., which we read at the time as kind of coded language for like, oh my God, we're losing the American right and they're becoming more anti-Semitic, so we have to kind of counter that.
So talk about the messaging that is there. There's a lot about, the audience is Christian, so about Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah, that I'll say has long been a theme in Israeli Hasbara. What has shifted is that it's no longer trying to make almost the case for Israel as much as it's trying to make the case against Palestinians. And I think what's really concerning is that you see that, I'll put this in the most blunt terms.
They talk about Palestinianism, not about Islam per se, right?
Yeah. And there's also a lot of anti-Islamic stuff, or stuff that, I would say problematizes like Islam and its relationship to America and American culture and this kind of stuff, which again, we've had for a while. In the most blunt way, I'll say it like this. This campaign was supposed to fight anti-Semitism. What it's actually doing is advancing, I'll be generous and say, the Israeli government's agenda, because I'm not even sure that it's the official government agenda as much as it's like kind of Bibiism as an entire worldview, because I think at this point with Netanyahu, we can't actually think of his kind of, geopolitics in terms of, an actual ideology that we can call Bibiism. And what we're seeing there more than more is kind of that. So one thing is this meta aspect, this compulsive obsession with perception, with narrative, which Netanyahu has long been kind of obsessed with both externally and internally.
It doesn't sound like the kind of thing you'd be seeing from the Israeli foreign ministry in terms of...
Exactly. That's the point. So, for example, there's tons of things that are about the hypocrisy of people calling out Netanyahu government's, recognition of Somaliland, for example, or, how hypocritical the Palestinians are for not supporting Taiwanese independence. And all this kind of little bookkeeping, you know what I mean? This one-upmanship. But there's also other concerning stuff. For example, the fact that there's praise for, international calls to recognize settlements. The moment someone praises Israel for recognizing settlements, these websites that are supposed to fight anti-Semitism are now, kind of, again, amplifying this kind of stuff. Other, I think, really problematic stuff there has a lot to do with obsessive battle against any argument for the Palestinian Authority getting any kind of power within any kind of diplomatic arrangement. It's amazing. There's articles dedicated to why giving the Palestinian Authority control of Gaza, as the Trump peace plan that we've agreed to suggest, is a terrible idea. And almost worse than letting Hamas take control. And you're like, what? Forget that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. What are we talking about? Whose agenda is that? That's not even Israel's official agenda. You know what I mean? This is some weird, backhanded Netanyahu, maneuvering. This is a type of kind of discourse politics we've long seen with Netanyahu. And just, again, as a citizen, as a journalist, this is not what my tax money is supposed to go to. If my government thinks anti-Semitism is a problem, they need to actually find a way to deal with that.
Did you find any actual content having to do with anti-Semitism?
Yeah, there is. There's two really funny examples of this. One is there's a headline which just looks like it's actually begging the question of this campaign, which just says, evangelicals do still support Israel. That was just the headline, okay, which I loved. And there was another one about amplifying Trump calling out anti-Semitism within MAGA ranks. So it became this kind of Trump is calling this out. If you're pro-Trump, you shouldn't be with this anti-Semitic vibe that is kind of resonating since Charlie Kirk. Through those kind of rare examples, it just became how jarring the rest of the campaign is. And again, you just ask, what is the actual goal here? Because when you actually contrast this to other attempts going on in Israel, you see that there's something, like a lot of things with Netanyahu's government, futile about it. So you might recall that we actually have we have a diaspora and anti-Semitism ministry, and they've looked into the GPT stuff, and they discovered something quite interesting, which is for your content to actually permeate into GPTs, it's actually good to recognize yourself, to actually be an official website, because then they rank it. So they've actually created very similar websites which are hosted directly on Israeli government domains, and it literally explicitly says hey Grok, hey ChatGPT, this is the Israeli government's official data set about Gaza. And it functions in a much more honest, direct way, and again, much more to a matter-of-fact kind of way. And then these campaigns, again, it seems like a lot of things in Netanyahu's government, it seems to be about something else altogether.
And do you have a guess as to what that something else is?
It's like a lot of things. There's something almost petty about it. They're just using this stuff to advance the government's interest, not even in the sense of the national
interest. This particular coalition.
Short-term, even weekly interest. The only thing that was heterodoxical to the government, which I think is interesting, is that there is, because of the obsession with disinformation and foreign influence and bots and there was a lot of claims and arguments about Qatar funding American universities, Qatar funding anti-Israel hate in the U.S. And that's very interesting because, people who follow the news in Israel would know that there's a huge scandal here involving Netanyahu's kind of personal political circles ties with Qatar exactly around these kind of influence stuff. So it's interesting in that sense where you see that they get that Qatar is part of the problem. They're trying to also solve that. But even that, again, is done within this kind of broader, we have to fight this anti-Israel sentiment, which is inherently completely false and baseless and not based on fact.
I mean, presumably this set of websites being created by American consultants is supposed to be able to get to American hearts and minds better than the Israeli sense. What I found interesting is in an age where Netanyahu seems to be playing along with Trump's transactional approach, including saying, we don't need that military aid, we're going to phase it out. These websites still emphasize sort of the shared values argument, only democracy in the Middle East, Judeo-Christian, and support things like the continuation of military military aid between America and Israel. And as much as in public, Netanyahu seems to be, trying to bow to Trump's transactional approach, these websites are really trying to go back to the idea that America and Israel are so close. They're the same. They're culturally similar. They rely on each other.
I agree with you 110%. I think you actually really spotted a really interesting point, because the main kind of centerpiece of this thing was this Aliyava website that simultaneously did exactly the two things you said. So on the one hand,
Aliyava, ally. The word ally is in it. Yeah, ally via.
It feels so generated, right? It's so just like, hey, Claude, hey, ChatGPT, create 20 names of websites that could be a think tank and sound super smart.
But can you say we're just, devil's advocate here, we're fighting fire with fire. If you really do believe that the internet is being flooded with anti-Israel hate, anti-Semitic hate, propaganda about how Israel is the devil, that we need to throw this stuff into the universe so that AI, tries to balance it. There's an argument for this, isn't there?
Spot on. You're absolutely right. It's not the argument that I would make, but it's not an argument that I agree with, but I think there is an argument to be made. And I'll say that. That's why I also started with that. We're seeing this happen across all the world of campaigns. So if you're selling Pepsi or Cola now, you're now also having this exact same discussion with whoever does digital campaigns for you. So at some level, 100%. I think that's why I did mention this other project, right? Because I think the question of efficacy is actually really important.
What
here.
Other project?
The official kind of AI-geared data sets that Israel is putting out through its diaspora ministry. And I contrast this because that's why I kept saying I don't feel that this campaign is actually about what they say it's about. This is about maybe, for example, also being close to people who are kind of close to the MAGA media universe. For example, maybe it's not about the content. And that's why the Aliyava example about military aid is so interesting, because on the one hand, it says unshakable bond, Israel and America forever. On the other hand, it also has posts being like, Israel will be fine without American aid. Okay, what reconciles that? And I think the answer, what reconciles that is this exactly kind of, it would be us ignoring the efficacy question. Because if we're actually trying to think about how we fight all the things that are actually happening, anti-Semitism, anti-Israel disinformation, fueled by inauthentic activity, and this leading to actual real anti-Semitism in the world, real issues, then we would notice, for example, that these websites maybe are not actually doing that. For example, they seem to also be fueling a lot of the issues that, maybe led us here, for example. For example, demonizing the Palestinians instead of solving our conflict. A million different examples. And also we would have this other debate, which is, hold on, why would you need these fake websites, like these fake think tanks? Why are you not doing it in an official way?
And we need to point out that the websites just aren't appearing and counting on people to get to them. People are getting messages, I guess targeted audience are getting text messages, come look, check out our website about peace and learn something about Israel, or we want to ask you questions about Israel.
This is another aspect of the campaign in which they're actually doing SMS messaging campaign based on data collected online, so they know who goes to certain churches, or that you can find this. Again, this is commercial data. This is how everyone does campaigns today. And they're pushing that out exactly in that way. And it's also possible that we're not the target audience of this, but I think like a lot of PR and Hasbara campaigns, the question of efficacy is being completely ignored.
How do we measure efficacy?
But we've never measured efficacy, and I think that's why it's so tragic about what happened October 7th. If you think, and I've said this here a few times and I'll say it again, Israel has invested so much money in Hasbara for the past 15, 20 odd years. And come October 7th, it looks like this is the first time we as a country have ever had any debate about how we are perceived abroad. There's something about the way we've managed this, which is inherently ineffective. And maybe it's because you can't do Hasbara as a standalone kind of thing. Maybe it does need to be linked to reality, for example, which would be my argument at some level. No, seriously. And I think this disconnect from reality has long kind of fueled the way Hasbara works, and therefore its inefficiency is kind of built into it. And that's why I kind of like this other example of the diaspora ministry, because it's like there's a small professional team there that tried to kind of, look into how you do this. They discovered that, Grok and AI like official websites, and they put together a data set. It probably cost them 1,500 shekels. And then now, on the other hand, there's a $6 million campaign that some ex-Trump, social media wizard is running. No one knows who's authorizing the campaigns. It has insane headlines like Palestinianism is inherently contradictory to Christianity, Christian teachings, which is
or proving that Jesus was a Palestinian is a lie.
How does that fight anti-Semitism? Forget pro-Palestinian. If the documents were say we fight pro-Palestinian, I'd be like, okay, maybe, right. But how does this fight anti-Semitism? Seriously, how is this directly connected? So there might be some abstract influence argument where you're countering a deep narrative that undermines. Okay, maybe, but there's something about it that feels like more fodder. And then to your question, we're fighting fire with fire, the real truth is that we're leading the race to the bottom. would be the more accurate term. And I think this has long been the problem with Hasbara. And as we've discovered, it's not working, and it's actually blowing up in our faces.
Is it pointing to things that we need to be careful about as we Israelis head into a national election this year, and that Americans are, presumably this campaign may have to do with heading into the midterm elections, both which will take place next fall? Do you see trends that we're going to have to watch out for?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think what we're seeing here that everyone should kind of be cognizant of and be aware of is this is how campaigns look today. Like, the influence is not like, people pushing fake websites, or not only people pushing fake websites on your social media feed. It's not just these, like fake influencers and da-da-da. It's actually something much more profound, which is an attempt to penetrate your GPTs and the answers that they generate, because they know that late at night when you don't know what to vote, you ask, like, so you know me, GPT, who should I vote for? And and they want to be in, like everyone, like Pepsi and like every advertiser in the world, they want to be in that kind of stack, to use the tech term. And I think we have to be aware of that. And the other thing which I think is really interesting come campaign is this kind of hyper-targeting. These SMS messages are actually something really interesting, because more and more we're seeing campaigns focus on people in what we call the non-indexed web. So, for example, I can't see what messages you get, right? So I don't know about that campaign. Unless you post a screenshot, I have no way of knowing it, unlike a website, which I can find online, right? So I think more and more we're going to see these hyper-targeted campaigns.
Is this happening all over the world, or we're really leading the way on this?
This is happening all over the world. I think with Israel, what's so interesting is that it's happening very fast. We're now a very strong first example of how this works. From my perspective, from the historical perspective, how it mirrors the same inefficiencies we saw with the previous round of Hasbara.
Omer, I can't let you go from this podcast. I mean, everyone would think that you are spending 24/7 on this story, but you have been reporting on so many things in your extensive beat of cyber and disinformation. So I want to just touch on some of your other articles, which are amazing, and I suggest that listeners check them out. 4 years now on this podcast, but obviously in your coverage, you've been following the use of Israeli spyware around the world, how they're being used in problematic ways. In past years, really, the headlines were around this company NSO and its spyware Pegasus. I remember you predicting that focusing on NSO isn't going to really solve the problem, because so many more startups are going to mushroom.
Yeah.
I'm curious, a few years later, after you made that assertion, it seems it's proved itself out, looking at some of your stories, including one on an Israeli company called Intellexa. You've been writing about how our cars are spying on us, which is really reassuring. So just, stepping back on this whole issue of Israeli spyware, how it's being used and misused around the world, by who? By governments, by private actors. What's the picture right now? Again, a few years after the NSO scandal sort of grabbed headlines.
So I have a great answer for you. So I think what actually happened is that age has kind of ended. Like, I was right in the sense where NSO is no longer that interesting of a firm. And more than that, Israel is not necessarily the most interesting country, because America, after the Biden administration kind of crack down on this, on NSO, and also on Intellexa, which is this kind of rival firm that operates from outside of the Israeli jurisdiction, operates from Europe, and sells to regimes that Israel doesn't let you sell surveillance technologies to. Now, under Trump, America is becoming a spyware powerhouse and has actually bought NSO. So NSO is now owned by an American kind of collection of Americans, Israeli Americans, but also Americans. Candiro, which was the computer hacking firm, was also sold to an equity fund.
So we've gone from America sort of trying to outlaw us to America saying, "Hey, that looks great. We're going to get on that train,"
and then sanctioning our firms and then buying them on the cheap. And I think what's actually happened since that, and this is a really interesting point, that since AI has emerged, we're kind of actually going back to the age of mass surveillance. And I think this is kind of what I would want to leave our listeners with, in the sense where it's like NSO was a fantasy about hacking into the most encrypted, protected device, the most intimate device in the world, right? Your phone. But it was targeted. It was your phone, right? It was this high value person. Now with AI, it's all about collecting data and tracking people and then kind of cross-referencing that data. No one wants to hack phones. Everyone wants to be Palantir, because if you hack phones, you get in trouble with Apple. If you fuse massive amounts of data, which is actually not that big of an issue to store anymore. If you're the government, it was never an issue, but now even more with AI. You can store millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of hours of phone recording and text and whatever you want, and fuse that all together and cross-reference it with license plate data and camera data. Yeah, you can do all that now. and everyone now wants to get into that space. So post this kind of takeover of the cyber hacking world by America, what we're now seeing in Israel is the rise of new kind of Palantir-ish different type firms that focus not necessarily on getting data, but fusing data together. So not hacking your phone, but helping a government agency synthesize the data from your phone with the data collected from your laptop with whatever other shit they can find.
And we're mostly talking about governments that are interested in these kinds of products, or also private industry, I don't know, Mexican drug cartels.
At this point, it's what they call defense tech. It's a government, it's a G2G kind of world, like B2G world, people who sell technologies to governments. But it's part of, there is what we call this kind of civilian window gap in which, like, over time, these products will enter the civilian market, and we have seen that. So, for example, one of my big scoops was that ad data is also being used to hack people's phone, but also to spy on people. So you get mobile ads, right? You open anything, Candy Crush or whatever, like any app, any game, even WhatsApp shows you ads, right? Those ads, so they are targeted to you. They don't just know your gender or your identity. They also know your locations, because they can say, hey, there's a gas station 2 miles up the road. Like, do you want a discount? Because it's a good ad, right? We get why your location is good. So what happens? Turns out that intelligence companies can pretend to be advertisers and ping you with 1 million ads and then just track you as you play Candy Crush driving down a road. So, for example, ad data, which used to be considered like just endless and boring, is now a national security kind of asset, right? And it's just one example. Car data is the same thing. Car data used to be really boring. Like, it's something, that you get for parking tickets and, like, for paying for toll roads. Nope. Now it's like an intelligence gold mine. And there's this kind of race to build programs that can also collect, but mostly fuse and help people identify through open data.
This is relevant to Israelis who are traveling around the world, and want to remain secure. And I'm even thinking in an American context, the whole ICE and tracking people and illegals, and so all kinds of agendas can be found.
I'll add one more thing. Americans are specifically among the Western citizens with the least amount of privacy rights in the world. So if you're an American, the only other kind of the only person who there's a comparable amount of data about online is a Russian. Like, there's the countries with the least privacy for their citizens. Israelis are more protected. Europeans have great privacy laws. So I think moving forward, everyone should think about that. That's because they use that for elections. They use that for a million different things. And your data is you.
So now we don't just have to stay off our phones and computers. We have to not drive our cars as well.
100%. No, I'm joking. Just be aware of it. We're seeing all these shifts happen all the time. And with the GPTs, I think we need to just be very, very, very conscious of what this shift is leading to online. And what's leading to online is the fact there's less and less provenance. The role of actual human gatekeepers and fact checkers is getting smaller and smaller, and the sources are becoming less and less clear. And I think when you combine that with the data, we're actually heading towards a very scary 2-3 years where you'll be able to be super hyper targeted and, like, actually gaslit, you know what I mean, at a highly professional level through AI that's being automated for these campaigns, right? And I think people just need to be conscious of
what they click on.
Yeah, and also where it's coming from broadly, like if it's a human or not human. I'd say that's what I think about today. Is it human or not human?
Omer, your reporting and your podcast appearances make me feel much more informed and also much more paranoid. Really, listeners should go check out your articles. There are many of them, and they're all fascinating, interesting. Keep up the good work.
Thank you for having me, and keep inviting me back.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz podcast. Thanks to my guest, Omer Ben Jacob, and producer and editor, Adi Shacham. If you want to continue to listen to the podcast, make sure you never miss an episode. Please subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to leave a comment and a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.